Kia ora.
The Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr Speaker, I'm rising to support the confidence motion, and I think rise and support a confidence motion about a government that has a privilege of leading a very confident country. I think the positive mood of this country, it's obviously a subjective matter in part, is very obvious. And it's based on a number of things. Some of them have absolutely nothing to do with whoever's in charge of the Treasury benches. We've had some great sporting successes that we all celebrate. The weather's been great, probably too great for some of our farming folk. Let's hope that the rain gives them a little bit of relief. But there's a sense of confidence around the country. And I think that's reflected, first of all, at the political level. I mean, the people have spoken. I mean, I listened to some of the speeches today just with, wondering what on earth is going through people's minds. I mean, is it, the public have once again made a terrible mistake scenario? But the reality is this. As the Prime Minister said in his opening statement today, Mr Speaker, we've been given a very clear mandate to carry on in a third-term government. And we are just brimming with new ideas. We've got some wonderful fresh talent which has come in with us in the last election that I think will serve whoever forms the leadership of the National Party in a generation ahead of us. Tremendous base to renovate and keep the country moving, keep the party moving forward. We are in a very confident position. In terms of, results on the street, we can see this clearly, first of all, in a number of areas in which I don't have a great deal of professional input into, but our crime rates are at 35-year low. People are safer in the streets. Is this good enough? Absolutely not. What are we going to do? We're going to carry on and try and drive that trend line even better. That's the theme of our third-term government. And as you listen inevitably to the speeches that will be made over the next 2.5 years about, quote, tired third-termitis, just look at the facts. As somebody once said, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. So this is where we will be coming from. And I want to talk now about the economy, because that is absolutely central to what I think is the confident mood of this country. I think it's central to why we were re-elected by the New Zealand people for a third term. And I think it's central to why we feel very confident about what we are doing. We have a very clear idea about what the next steps in this process are. Now, economic fundamentals lie at the heart of this. There was a famous, very hard-line Treasury Secretary in Australia called Dr. John Stone, inevitably giving rise to the phrase, the Stone Age. And he said something along these lines. Many politicians decry economic fundamentals and believe these are the concerns only of ivory tower academics. But the history of Western democracies is littered with the political bodies of those who said those things. And ultimately, economic fundamentals will impose themselves on people. I'm well aware, Mr. Speaker, of the old dictum, the public wouldn't know a deficit if it fell over in the street. And you could say the same thing for a number of these issues like total factor productivity, and probably not many people sit around at dinner parties worrying about trends in total factor productivity and whether we're in surplus or not. But finally, Mr. Speaker, actually, governments need to be concerned about economic fundamentals, because they will impose themselves on things that people can very much understand. And they will impose themselves either positively or very negatively. Right now, we're seeing a drama unfold in Greece around this issue of Brexit, which is all about this. So the successive governments on the left of centre in Greece spent like drunken sailors. Admittedly, not just their fault. The people that lent the money were also reckless in lending them more and more money to the point where debt to GDP ratios exceeded 200%. But the reality now is that the poor Greek people in the street, they are now suffering from a lack of attention to economic fundamentals. And it's a long, hard road back up from there. So if a government doesn't discharge its premier responsibility on the economic front of maintaining sound books, keeping competitiveness in check, making sure there's discipline on public spending, trying to protect people who are vulnerable, but also maintaining incentives to work, The people in the street who, yes, they may not know a deficit if they fell over it, but they will find out the hard way if the governments do not pay attention to these fundamentals. But what we're seeing, I think, now, Mr. Speaker, in New Zealand is very clear signs. I don't think they arose just in the last few months. I think we've been seeing them now for at least 12 to 18 months of the sound attention led by our Minister of Finance, Mr. English, starting now to produce things that people in the street really can feel and really can relate to. So, on the fundamentals, I think the key issues are we're moving away from projected very large surpluses into what will be, we hope, a paper-thin surplus. It's been a very tough ask. It's been very difficult to manage the books without slashing and burning. All this talk about slashing and burning is just some fantasy, just some political rhetoric. We have done exactly the opposite. We borrowed heavily during the global financial crisis to protect the poor and the vulnerable people of this country, but we somehow managed to get through that and still get the books back to a very sensible position, and we're quite happy that they're projected to be 20%, Crown debt projected to be 20% by 2020. We've also, thanks to very able leadership in the Reserve Bank, we got monetary policy into an interesting position. You know, the fact that we've got I think it's 3.5 at the moment, OCR, is actually a sign of strength. It's way above other people's interest rates. But actually, the countries in serious trouble are the countries with either zero or close to zero interest rates or essentially negative interest rates. They have run out of any capacity to use monetary policy in a creative way. And I do recall a very important hedge fund manager saying recently in the Financial Times, there are certain things, he said, that we all wish could be uninvented. Nuclear weaponry, chemical weaponry, and boy bands. I leave it to members to speculate on why he added boy bands into that. And he said then, crucially, I confidently predict that we shall add quantitative easing to that list. So the United States is now starting to deal with the realities of essentially zero interest rates, which have massive distortions. And this will not be easy. Europe is now going to go down that same track. The fact that we have got actually a relatively high interest rate, although still lowest for many years, is actually a sign of the underlying strength of this economy. Another reason which will translate into things that people in the street can understand. So, what we now have is, let's start to look at what the people can. First of all, the people have got more jobs. A huge number. I think the figure from memory was 217,000, the Prime Minister quoted in his speech. And I think 83,000 people have been employed in the last year. The really intriguing thing about this, by the way, even that well-known right-wing commentator Rod Oram said, because I heard it on Talkback, that the important thing to focus is not the minor flick up from very low 5.4 to 5.7, but the extraordinary growth in the participation rate, which means that finally people who have been a bit marginalised feel confident enough, Mr. Speaker, to come back into the workforce because they know that there are jobs there. And I was very intrigued over the weekend. The United States job market figures are very interesting in terms of the political debate here in New Zealand, because in spite of the vast difference of size, US GDP is about 100 times larger, there was a tremendous increase in the number of jobs created in the United States in January. And this is extremely positive. But actually exactly the same thing happened. The unemployment rate flicked up a tick or two by, I think, 0.3%. But all of the commentators in the United States said the really important thing is the participation rate also increased. American, working class people who've been marginalized by this crushing situation in the United States economy are now got enough confidence to come back and look for work. Yes, it's flicked up the unemployment rate a little bit, but it's a great sign for the United States that their participation rate went up to 62.8%. Mr. Speaker, that figure is interesting. Our figure is 7 percentile points higher than that. We have got an amazing job record. This government has got an amazing job record. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, while we'll hear rhetoric over the term of this Parliament about third-termitis, we are dealing with a country that's confident, with a government that's confident, and a very clear vision of what needs to be done. We're going to carry on, as the Prime Minister said.
I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.